Everyone, welcome back or welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Lamia and I'm really passionate about access to education and cool things. And on this channel, I pretty much share everything I know on scholarships, opportunities, and cool things. Today, I have a little bit of a different video, but I figured it would be interesting to a few people. I recently did a communications workshop in the Arcadia community in Zimbabwe. I just thought to myself, like, flash forward 20 years from now, let's say my dream job is on the line and, they're going through background checks because they inevitably will, do background checks. And then they come across a tweet like this from me and they don't know me personally enough to know my sense of humor. I must say that during my presentation, when I was telling this specific anecdote, I feel like I had the most engagement. I feel like every single audience member was paying full attention. So I figured, why not make a whole YouTube video talking about all the reasons I do not have Twitter, even though I aspire to be a diplomat. So firstly, the disclaimer, I'm not here to slander Elon Musk. I'm not here to, bash Twitter. I'm actually not even here to encourage you to delete Twitter. I'm mostly just here because I like talking about this subject and nobody's ever asking me, why don't you have Twitter anymore? And I'm just like waiting for the opportunity. Like, why don't you ask me? Because I've got some points to make. But if you happen to be on the fence about deleting Twitter or not, I hope by the end of this video you have a little bit more clarity on, your next steps, if you will. So obviously I have to start with, telling you guys a little bit about my history with Twitter. So my sister and I were not allowed to download Facebook until we were 18. My mom put this rule in place as soon as Facebook started taking off. And so that was always like the standard rule. Obviously all my friends had Facebook, but I was not on Facebook. I never felt FOMO. Honestly, I think that's to do with like how I personally am. Like I'm not easily persuaded and stuff like that. And also it helped that I had friends who were just like, girl, you're not missing out on anything. Like, it's trash. And this was in the early 2010s. So that's telling. I've always really liked communicating and sharing my ideas and stuff. Anyway, so my whole plan of action, but okay, I'm really strategic. Like, I'm not the smartest, I'm not the funniest, unfortunately, but the most strategic. I've said it before on this channel, but your girl's got a good strategy for everything. So I was like, okay, cool. My mom's rule was you cannot have Facebook. Not a single clause in that contract said anything about Twitter and Instagram. So my plan of action was pretty much I'd download these apps before my mom had any knowledge of these apps. Like, I literally have had Instagram since like 2012. Like, I'm an OG. Like, Adam Mosseri needs to hit me up and like give me a blue check or something because I'm literally an OG. Anyway, I had Instagram before my mom could say anything. Same with Twitter. However, with Twitter, I really wasn't interested. I couldn't get into it. I just didn't get the vibes. And another important point to make is that my sister and I were literally at boarding school in the countryside of Zimbabwe, and my school was notorious for having terrible signal. I mean, if your message that you had sent on WhatsApp on a Monday had been delivered to the person on Friday, like, that was a good week. So I mean, yeah, pretty much you couldn't even send WhatsApp, so I guess Twitter was really out of the picture. So I pretty much had this profile and I was obviously inactive. I don't even think I had a profile picture, to tell you the truth. That was my history with Twitter. I had an account, but I just like forgot about it and it was not active. Anyway, I ended high school in 2016, and the way the Zimbabwe school system is set up is it follows a calendar year. So school starts in January, ends in December. So obviously I was then going to go off to university, which, in most countries begins in September. So I had that little mini 9-month gap year from January 2017 to about September 2017. So I had all this free time. I was honestly getting to know my family because I'd been in boarding school my entire life. And so it was the first time I was like home during the week and home during what would otherwise be term time, and it was just weird. Basically, I had a lot of time on my hands. Enough time to rekindle, renovate, and, restart my Twitter account. And it was really funny because I obviously finally, managed to get in. I obviously had to set a new password and all of that. And I had a tweet from one of my friends, Aiden, if you're watching this, oh my goodness. And basically Aiden had left this message. Aiden had tweeted me like back in 2013, and he had literally like atted me and he was like, so tweet then. So obviously I had to make a joke out of it. And literally like 4 or 5 years later, I like replied to the tweet and I was like, I tweeted. And it was just like, it was so funny because, guys, seriously, and you know how like the dates are on your tweets? Oh, jeez. That's peak humor. I don't know, maybe I have a wacky sense of humor, but that was funny to me. Anyway, I finally, figured out how to use Twitter. I kind of got into it. I was following all my friends. I realized like it was peak humor. It was funny, it was good vibes, and I was quite active, I would say. I wouldn't say I was Twitter fingers because I don't think I had that much to say. So yeah, I continued to use Twitter for, I would say, about 2.5 years into my 3-year university degree. And this was honestly where I would say I was in my Twitter prime. Not that I was like Twitter famous or anything, but I was an active user of the app, and it only actually dawned on me when I was having a conversation with like my Twitter list friends, and I was like, oh, I'm thinking of deleting Twitter. And one of them was like, oh, really? I would have never guessed, like, you are in there. I was like, really, am I? And I went home and I reflected, and I was like, honestly, he made points, because like honestly, every time I see these people, I'm probably like, so I saw this thing on Twitter. During this time, I will say that even though I was really enjoying the app, I think I was self-aware enough to know that it was also the cause of a lot of my unhappiness. I mean, I'm going to get into the points of what, you know, ultimately led me to deleting the app for good. But I remember taking like different precautions. Like I tried to make, like, I started off with a very personal account, of course, and then, you know, I was like realizing it wasn't actually benefiting me all that much personally. So then I tried to make it all professional and stuff, and I tried to only follow, you know, politicians and ambassadors and stuff, so that that's the kind of content that I was engaging with the most. And even like my bio, like, it was giving professional vibes. And then I remember taking a break from the app. I deleted the app in, I want to say, the end of 2019. I remember what actually led to me deleting the app and taking a break was I had tweeted something that was actually really vulnerable, and I just remember a few hours later when I came to my senses, so to speak, I just remember being like, how did I tweet this? But I just felt like I need to take a break from this app for sure. So I took a break, and then the pandemic arrived, March 2020, and I had zero urge to download the app. My initial thought was, I know that there's just chaos on the timeline right now. I don't want to be engaging with that. And of course, initially they told us that we'd only be in lockdown for 2 weeks. So of course that didn't end up happening. But I just had no urgency to re-download the app. And then of course in mid-July 2020, I made the decision to permanently delete my account. To anyone who like quits an app, it's no train smash, but I want to emphasize here that I have, you know, set my sights on becoming a diplomat. And, you know, in this international affairs space, Twitter is essential. It is crucial. I mean, the stats are as follows. According to Diplomacy, which provides studies on the use of digital tools by governments and international organizations, in 2018, over 98% of all 193 UN member states had an official presence on Twitter. The most platform globally for most world leaders is Twitter, followed by Facebook and then Instagram. And then in 2019, Diplomacy organized a Twitter poll. They'd asked the world leaders, governments and foreign ministries on Twitter how they use the platform and what were the benefits of Twitter for digital diplomacy. Most foreign ministries replied that Twitter is a tool for furthering diplomatic and foreign policy goals and communicating diplomacy and consular activity. One user wrote that the great benefit of Twitter for diplomacy is that content travels far and fast, directly engaging and impacting people. So all this data and all this information kind of alludes to the fact that I could potentially be jeopardizing my very budding career. And doesn't that keep me up at night? Honestly, it doesn't. I'm actually very much at peace with the fact that I don't have Twitter despite knowing all of this. Okay, let's get into the points that make me feel very self-assured that I'm really not missing out on too much on Twitter. Okay, firstly, Twitter made me a very reactionary person, and I would like to believe that otherwise I'm quite slow to respond. And I say this because I'm pretty sure there were many times where I would, you know how you get the little news headlines with the link, and I think there were many times I'd just read the headline and then I would quote tweet the headline with whatever opinion I had without actually going in to read the article, let alone, you know, jumping off of that article to go and do even like further research before forming an opinion on it. And I just didn't like that, because I always want to be somebody who, you know, makes like a well-formed opinion, somebody who takes into consideration like both sides of the story and stuff like that. I almost felt like the timeline was not built for that. It's quick, you know, like had I taken time out to go and like do some research into the headline and stuff, like by the time I would come back, it would be a week later when the headline wasn't popping anymore. You know what I mean? I didn't like how fast-paced and how reactionary Twitter was making me. This was honestly, I think, one of the biggest push factors, and it was just the fact that I had no control over what I was seeing. With my social media accounts, especially my Instagram, like I'm all about curation. Like I need everything to be intentional, and I know this sounds a bit neurotic, but for the sake of my mental health, like it needs to have been curated by me. I just like the fact that I can control what I see, although the current Instagram algorithm is kind of trying to embarrass me right now. On Twitter, I tried my hardest, like I mentioned in my intro, like I tried so hard to make sure that I was only following, you know, like ambassadors and stuff to make sure that it was like career centric for me. But that wouldn't work because of course I still had like a few friends that I followed and people like from school and stuff. And if you don't have Twitter, Twitter's one of those apps where if it's like LinkedIn, where let's say you follow me and I follow Taylor Swift and I'm always engaging with her content, as in I'm liking her tweets and I'm commenting and stuff, it'll still show up on your timeline to be like, Lamia commented, oh my gosh, the greatest songwriter of all time on Taylor Swift's tweet. So I was still seeing a lot of things that I just didn't want to engage with. And I had a problem with that because I was like, I can't even, the only thing I can do to salvage my mental health at this point is to just delete the app, because the minute I click onto this bird app, I'm going to be bombarded with things that I don't want to see today. Pretty much bouncing off of my previous point, I just felt like the whole app was just so detrimental to my mental health. I say that because I think you get some characters on Twitter. I wasn't getting into any Twitter wars, but I will say that like you can't just mind your business on this app. There was this one time, there was this trend going around. I think it was quite Africa-centric. And it was basically, you know, posting 4 pictures and then captioning it, fine girl or boy from Ghana. So I made a whole thing out of it. I was really connected with my roots at this point. And so I had asked like my cousins, my sister for pictures. And I was like, fine people from Somaliland. So I just remember this one person commented, and he commented in French. I think he is Belgian based, and he pretty much said something to the effect of like Somaliland doesn't exist. And I was just like, you couldn't just say, yeah, they are beautiful people and just keep it pushing, you know? No, you had to let me know your political opinions. And so, yeah, I just felt like there's all sorts of characters on Twitter. Twitter wars are a real thing. People are very confident getting behind keyboards, especially on Twitter, I would say. And I mean, you know, even recently I was watching D'Angelo Wallace's video on why he kind of took a break from YouTube. He himself, who I imagine has quite a significant following on Twitter, you know, talks about how detrimental Twitter was to his mental health overall.
No, dude. Twitter for me was not it. Every time I would open it, I would get depressed.
I think one of the main things, like apart from just, you know, finding all sorts of characters on Twitter, I also feel like it was just so much stimulation. Like it's almost like TikTok in a way. You're just scrolling through all these pieces of information, and like for me, I would often end up being overstimulated. Not to mention I was, you know, doing a full-time degree and I already had so much to think about. On top of that, like everything that I'd seen on the timeline that day would still be kind of like going around in my head, you know, when I was just trying to fall asleep. I constantly felt this pressure to be unique on Twitter. Like I constantly felt like I needed to be witty. I felt like my punchlines needed to give Dave Chappelle a run for his money. I felt like I just had to be constantly charismatic. That might just be a me thing, but it honestly wasn't good for my mental health. Like I would rethink so much about what I was tweeting because I needed it to be extraordinary. That was a very Twitter experience for me. Like I never felt like whenever I'm posting on Instagram, I never overthink things to the point of like, oh no, my eyebrow is out of place. Like it's never like that. It just kind of feels more easy. But on Twitter, it always felt like work. And I was like, I don't really want my social media accounts to feel like work. I didn't feel like I could entirely be my authentic self on Twitter. There were a few things that I really liked about Twitter, which I think honestly kept me hanging onto the app for much longer than I needed to be there. One of them being, you know, like Twitter was really a good news source for me, like a news outlet. And then I was just like, no, Lamia, like download the BBC app, you know, like now I get news roundups on my LinkedIn, which is amazing. And I just kind of found alternatives for it. Like I realized that it didn't always have to be a catchy headline, which I was giving my 2 cents on before actually reading the article. Embarrassing. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I was like, oh my gosh, Twitter is like headquarters for memes. Like all the memes on Instagram are like 2 years too late. Like they're coming from Twitter and they were, you know, we missed its prime. It ties into like what I was saying before. Like I'm fortunate in that I don't feel this constant need to be like in the mix. So I was just like, you know what, like memes is perfectly fine on Instagram. They will eventually get me the very good memes that went viral on Twitter. And honestly, like a good laugh doesn't expire. And then lastly, I was just genuinely worried about like losing my Twitter savoir-faire. In September of 2021, I ended up getting this communications internship at UNICEF. And I was actually really stressed. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. Like after I was alerted that they selected me, I was like, oh my goodness. I was doing so much like research on like how does one tweet? What's Twitter protocol? Because I felt like I'd lost it. It took me about a week, 10 days to get my footing. I think I underestimated how quickly I could pick up like Twitter skills, Twitter protocol, if you will. And I was kind of stressed that I'd put myself in a situation professionally where I'd kind of like need a Twitter account. But honestly, guys, let me tell you my trick. I literally just made a burner account, no profile picture, a pseudonym. Funny story, which I must tell. One of my friends, she's gonna be watching this right now. Hi, Tandy. I was like telling her about how I had made a burner account. She's like, oh yeah, I know. And I was like, how? Like not even remotely under a name that like kind of relates to mine. It's just like, no, her Twitter notifications had like alerted her. One of her contacts had made a Twitter account. And obviously she had gone into the profile and she noticed it was only following UN accounts. And she was like, yeah, I obviously knew it was you after that. And here I was thinking that I was really just outsmarting the system. It really helped. Like my burner account, I could do everything that I needed to do on there professionally. And by that, I just mean learning how to Twitter basically. So yeah, you know, in the event that I work in communications again, I no longer have that fear that I don't, you know, have this like knowledge of like a specific social media platform. In fact, I'm just like, okay, I'll just like resort to a burner account again. And it was so stress-free. Like on this burner account, I wasn't seeing anything I didn't want to. And that brings me to the end of this video. I really hope that you guys have enjoyed listening to my points as to why I no longer have Twitter. Even as an aspiring diplomat, it's been almost 3 years since I deleted my account permanently. And let me just tell you, Elon Musk couldn't pay me to reverse my decision. I mean, obviously we need to discuss how much he would be paying, because like it's honestly one of the best decisions I've made like ever for my mental health. That's enough. Let me just stop there. For my mental health, I love that there's always going to be, you know, BuzzFeed articles where somebody has done the Lord's work and they have, you know, gathered all of the best tweets about like, you know, a Netflix show that I just started watching. If you are considering deleting Twitter permanently, I will tell you I'm perfectly fine. I don't feel any less pop cultured. I genuinely feel like it's been one of the best decisions I've ever made. And if you do happen to be on the fence, my advice would be, you know, just take a break, maybe a month, 2 months, and see how you feel. And you know, if you notice that your quality of life significantly increases, then I think you have your answer. I would love to know if you have a love-hate relationship with Twitter. How do you filter out all of the rubbish? And yeah, what are your opinions on all things Twitter? I'm so keen to hear. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.